Content warning. Things can get pretty rough in prison. We're going to be talking about some subjects that some people might find disturbing. Hi, I'm Amelia Saw, and this is On Guard, a podcast about what really goes on inside prison. And it comes from the best source in town, the prison officers. Unlike police, who go looking for the bad guys, each day a prison officer turns up at work, they're guaranteed to find them. Imagine doing a job where every shift was spent rubbing shoulders with Australia's worst criminals. These are the heroes who keep the country's rapists, serial killers and child molesters exactly where the rest of us want them, locked away in prison. But you don't walk away from a job like that unscathed. These guys have got stories. Most of them are shocking, some of them are tragic, and others are just bloody funny. The one thing I can guarantee is that you've never come across anything like it. Steve Bergervoet spent 32 years in corrections, working predominantly in minimum security prisons in Victoria. But that doesn't mean he's only dealt with lightweight crims. He's come across all sorts, including Benji Vanyaman, a key figure in Melbourne's gangland killings. And he's even got personal with infamous crim Chopper Read. Steve, thank you for joining me. How are you going?
I'm well, yourself?
Good. So, listen, you're a former prison supervisor, and one of your great passions was not actually keeping prisoners locked up. It was, in fact, helping getting them ready for release.
Yeah, that's correct. The way a lot of people seem to think if you put somebody in prison and throw away the key, everything's going to be okay. But the person has eventually got to be released from prison, and how we release him from prison is a reflection of how he's going to behave when he gets outside prison. So if we can prepare him, retrain him, give him skills in prison, get him through programs to address his offending behaviour, and try and get the person ready for release and get him out there and give him support when he gets out, so that and that's done through community corrections. And that way less chance of the prisoner reoffending and coming back to prison again.
You actually dealt with quite a well-known prisoner, quite a well-known offender actually, the hot chocolate rapist. Harry Barkas was a serial sex offender who prowled Melbourne's nightclubs during the 90s and the early 2000s. He got his nickname because several of his victims said they were given a rehypnol-laced hot chocolate before being attacked. Barkas would offer his victims a lift home, then suggest they stop at a service station to pick up a hot drink. Once his victim was comatose, Barkas would rape them. In one instance, he raped the woman for 15 hours while she was out cold. The predator often worked in tandem with his friend John Ziadis. Together, they would trawl nightclubs for victims, and they even perfected identical routines for drugging and raping women. When they were finally caught, Ziadis was jailed for a minimum of 20 years, but Barkas only got 9. Prosecutors had initially charged him with 24 offences, but the case fell over once it got to court. In the end, he accepted a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to 3 rapes. He would have been eligible for release last year, but died in custody in 2016. What kind of job did he want you to train him in?
Inside the prison, you have what's called a review and assessment committee, and when the prisoner applies for a program or for a permit of any sort, he's got to go before the review and assessment committee. And the hot chocolate rapist, Harry, he wanted to do a particular course in the education centre to retrain himself so he could have more skills when he got out. Anyway, he's fronted the committee and he's told us what program he wants to do. And I said to him, "No, Harry, I can't let you do that." He said, "Why not? You're supposed to be helping me rehabilitate myself and learn new skills." I said, "Yeah, Harry, but not any program you like, but not this one." And he started crying. He said, "Well, you won't let me do it." I said, "Harry, think about the media." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What does the media know you as?" He said, "I'm a hot chocolate rapist. I don't like it, but that's what they gave me." He said, "Yes, and what would the media do if this committee was found to have approved the hot chocolate rapist to do a barista course while he was in jail.
It's so good. And so what did he train in?
He eventually saw the situation and what the media could do. And that's where you've got to be very careful, of course. Yeah, whatever happens to a prisoner inside when they're high profile, if it gets out into the media, they're news. So anything that happens to them, the media is interested in. So,
do you know what he did study in the end?
Oh, look, we have all sorts of programs in prisons. When we in a place like Langi Kalkal, where I last worked, it's a working prison. Mm-hmm. Everybody has to work if they're medically fit. So if they're working on the farm, they do things like tractor courses, and they actually help the shearers and get a shed hand certificate. They do chainsaw courses. If they're working in a wooden products factory, they learn wooden skills. And it's all TAFE-approved courses, so they're actually getting out of jail with a certificate to prove that they have been qualified at something. It's all to help them get a job when they get out.
It does seem, just hearing it on face value, a little bit concerning that potentially violent criminals are being taught to use chainsaws, though.
It is rather unusual. You have officers who have been working in maximum security and they come and work in minimum security and they look out and they see a ladder up against a building, which in the maximum security prison you'd be pretty well concerned about, wouldn't you? Seeing a ladder up against the building. But it's a minimum security prison, doesn't have any walls. They're one step away from freedom. So they things like doing courses. I mean, it's not unusual to see a prisoner walking out. He's going to go out and cut some firewood and walking down the track with a chainsaw across his shoulders. It's just something that you wouldn't see in any other prison, but you do see it in minimum security prisons. And that's what it's all about there. Which we try to reflect what their life inside. We try and reflect what life is like on the outside. Work 8 hours a day, recreation for 8 hours, and sleep. And as opposed to being stuck behind four walls all the time. Did
you ever have, if you've got prisoners walking around, with an axe or whatever it is, did you ever get any trouble from the neighbours, the people living around the prison?
No. A lot of the country towns, like I work here at One Run Prison near Yarram, where I'm living now, and we had 60 prisoners a day going out in the community. Mm-hmm. We had one community gang, and their job was to paint local halls and just do community projects. And the other 50 were going out the bush, maintaining fire tracks, clearing poisons and so forth. Those that are working on the gang that did poisoning of weeds, they get chemical handler certificates. So it's communities around minimum security prisons are pretty well used to seeing prisoners around the place.
Yeah, right. And no one's ever concerned?
Oh, look, I imagine some people at some stage would be concerned. But see, a lot of these people around minimum security prisons, they're all farmers, and they've been there for many, many years, and the prison's been there for many years. So we're just neighbours.
You told me that if I had to trust anyone in the prison, my best bet would be a murderer. Why?
Because when a person who's committed the offence of murder, and by the time they get to a minimum security prison, they've done roughly 7 or 8 tenths of their sentence. If they're doing a 15-year sentence, and providing they behave themselves, they may well go to a minimum security prison with 3 years to go. For somebody who's been in jail that long, he sees the light at the end of the tunnel. He's one step away from freedom. So he's not going to stuff up. He's not going to do anything wrong. I mean, they do, human nature being what it is, of course. But in most cases, they're not junkies. They're not thieves. 90% of the murderers you have in prison are a one-off offence. They were clean skins before they came to jail. It was just a spur of the moment thing, and murderers are generally better behaved than a lot of the other prisoners are.
Better behaved than the other prisoners.
Yeah, because as I said, they're jail wise for a start off. They've been in there for a long time, so they know how to make the system work for them, and they know that there's 2 ways of doing your jail. You can do it easy or you can do it hard. And if you comply with the officer's instructions, do what you're told, do the work that's required of you and behave yourself, it's a much easier way of doing jail than jacking up and bucking the system.
Mm-hmm. So if murderers are the people you'd most trust to help you out, who would you least trust in terms of the types of offences?
Well, they're all different. Junkies, of course, are a big problem in prison because they're forever trying to get drugs in. It's then the last 14 years in the job I worked at Langy-Calcutta prison, and 75% of the prisoners there are sex offenders. And they're a different type of prisoner again because they're generally a very compliant prisoner because they're not criminals as in thieving and killing and so forth or using drugs. They're in there for sexually related offences, and they're a different kind of prisoner again because a lot of them are very well educated. They're very, very compliant. But you've got to be very careful because they're also very, very manipulative.
It's interesting how these certain offence types seem to attract certain characteristics in the types of people who commit them. So the sex offenders you're saying are quite often manipulative. You mentioned you also thought they were quite often quite intelligent.
Oh, very high. Well, you've got people, with university degrees, and they've very, very well educated. People like we have, as is publicly known, we've had in the protection prisons such as Langy-Calcutta we've had a fair few priests and that there and teachers, and these are all people with university degrees, so they're not dumb. And you just got to be very, very careful in dealing with them because officers. A lot of officers don't have the same education standard, and you don't want to get into any arguments with them because they can run rings around you. Some of these people, they're very, very bright.
One of your jobs was, helping these institutionalised people get ready to be released. How do you do that? What kind of things do you do with them? Say I've been in prison for 20 years. I've never stepped outside those gates. I've been pretty much just institutionalised for most of my life. What kind of activities do you do with them to teach them how to live in the world?
Well, what happens to all prisoners now? We have a system, the prison system called unit management, which is case managing the prisoners. It's not like the old days where it was a case where when prison officers were recruited, it was a case of, looked like how you could use a baton if you had to, and you've been around a bit. Now it's more, what are your computer skills, and what are your man management skills, and how do you interact with people? So when all officers now get a caseload of prisoners, or the average caseload might be 6 or 7 prisoners. So when the prisoner arrives at your location, the officer is given that prisoner as a caseload. He sits down with him. He looks at his offences, has a look at the judge's sentencing comments, and finds out the nature of the offence, which is something we never used to do years ago. But you work out, you talk to the programs people, the education people, and you say, well, this is what this bloke's done. What have you got for him? And then that's why when we have the review and assessment committees, they go through the prisoner's details. We go through his skills. What does he want to do? What does he want to achieve in jail? And prisoners are all set goals by their caseworkers on how they're going to go through their sentence. They can either sit there and do nothing and go through their sentence and get out at the end of it, or they can try and utilise the time while they're there. And it's the same with the parole board. Nowadays, the prisoner used to have to be able to behave himself to get parole. Now with the parole board, they want to see him having addressed his offending behaviour. If you're a sex offender, you have to have done the sex offender program before the parole board will consider letting you out on parole.
And what about just basic things? Do you take them and help them, I don't know, use a key card for the first time, or there must be some just very basic life skills that some of them just wouldn't have if they've been inside for a long time?
That's right. The first thing we teach a lot of people is how to look after themselves. Like we have a lot of these prisoners that we've received have lived with their parents and then lived in flop houses or wherever. All they've ever lived on is junk food. So we've got self-catering units where they actually, where they have to cook for themselves, and we put them through cooking courses so they learn to cook for themselves while they're there. And once again, these units are like 6 people, They're like blocks of flats, really. You would look at it from an outsider's point of view, you'd say it's luxury accommodation. But as I said, we're trying to reflect life on the outside, and it's like a 6-bedroom flat. And they all have to learn how to cook and keep the unit clean. And a lot of the people, it's the first time they've cooked when they've come to jail. First time they've had to clean their rooms when they've come to jail. It's you've got to assess each prisoner, and that's what the caseworker does with the initial interviews, is to assess each prisoner as to what his needs are and how well can he look after himself, and does he need assistance in that area.
If we're going to take a hard line on it, some people would say that these people who have killed people, or they're sex offenders who've done terrible damage to their victims, and they've been given a sentence and they should be doing their time. They should be being punished. What do you say to that? You're telling me some of these people are living in luxury accommodation flats and working, earning money, albeit not very much?
That's right. Well, look, and that's the general opinion of a lot of people who lock them up. And when you see some of their records, you think, well, that's all they deserve. But the thing is that you've got to realise that at the end of their sentence, they're going to be let out in the community when their sentence finishes. You just lock somebody up for 10 years, 15 years, and give them an hour's exercise every day and let them out in the community. You're going to be releasing somebody that's going to be a ticking time bomb. Because they're not going to be used. If I can just give you an example of one bloke who did 15 years jail, and he was helped. The Salvos do a great job in prisons, helping organise accommodation. One bloke, he didn't have any support at all in the community, so they got him a flat. They furnished the flat for him. He'd done about 15 years. And he got out, and the first night was fine. He got a couple of beers and a pizza and thought, this is great. The next morning, he walked out the balcony with his cup of coffee, and there was a couple of other people. It was a multi-storey block of flats. There's a couple of other people there at the balcony, and they saw him and they went inside, and he said, I just completely broke down because I realised then for the first time in all the time I'd been in jail, I didn't have anybody to help me, nobody to support me, nobody to talk to me over a cup of coffee in the morning. He said, and within 2 weeks, I'd reoffend to go back to jail because I had to go back to my comfort zone. Because when you're in prison, you've got outside, you've got nothing. You've even got the officer. If you've got a problem, you can go to your officer, to your caseworker, and talk to him about it. But once he got out, he had absolutely nothing, and he couldn't cope with it. And you're going to let out a lot of people who have been in prison for many years if you just put them in there and virtually throw away the key. Mm-hmm. You have to. As officers, we've got a responsibility to the community to try and release these people with minimum chance of them reoffending if you can. I mean, it's not always possible, but we've had a lot of successes and we've had a lot of failures too, of course. That's you have to get these people ready, and that's why you have things like a leave program. An officer will take them to town for 4 hours. Go to things like we take for granted, walking across a set of traffic lights in the intersection, sitting down in the food court and having a meal and a cup of coffee. That's things that we all take for granted. But for somebody like that that's been in jail for many years, it's a very, 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 very stressful experience.
Now, you were actually part of a program where, parallel to these prisoners being kind of prepared to be released, they were also helping prepare birds of prey to be released back into the wild. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, that was done in conjunction with Healesville Sanctuary. The 3 officers were involved. Mick and Steve and Murray went and did some training with Healesville, and they went back and they built the flights, and we would get wedge-tailed eagles, owls, hawks, and after their injuries had been treated, because they'd been hit by cars or shot, they had to go through a complete molt before they could be released back into the wild again. So they would send them down to us. So we were to Healesville, we were their minimum security sort of thing. We were exactly the same with the birds as what it was for the prisoners. Mm-hmm. So we had to prepare those birds for release, and it was a great program. It's very successful, and they ended up making a movie about it called Healing, starring Hugo Weaving, which was based on the actual raptor release program. And Yeah, very good watch if you ever get the chance to see it.
Yeah, he may have been a hard man once. He's just an old man now.
Well, the file says he hasn't had a visitor for 18 years.
So who's his lucky caseworker then?
Oh, piss off.
We're a working farm here, gentlemen.
The aviaries, care of the birds. That'll be your responsibility.
Her name's Yasmin. She comes back to you.
One thing that we'd always been able to say was every prisoner that was actually involved, and there was up to 4 or 5 prisoners working with the Eagles at once. None of the prisoners that have ever worked there had reoffended, which was quite a feather in our cap. They learn responsibilities and how to look after. Some of them have never looked after anything before. So it was a successful program for the birds and for Healesville and for us. So, and the prisoners got a lot of benefit out of it too. It was got a lot of publicity at the time, and then to have made a movie about it was we were quite chuffed about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing achievement too that none of those prisoners reoffended. So, tell me, there was one inmate that you had a bit to do with, well, a couple that are relatively well known. One of them was Benji Vanyaman. He was a hitman, wasn't he? I believe he was Carl Williams' hitman, and he became quite a key figure in the Melbourne underworld killings.
One of Australia's most ruthless killers, Andrew Benji Vanyaman, a hitman who shot dead 7 people as he murdered his way to the top of the Melbourne underworld.
He was absolutely fearless, would never take a backward step.
To those closest to him, gentle and charming.
Andrew was my soulmate, yeah. He was everything to me.
In truth, a cold-blooded assassin.
He didn't even get a chance to get out of the driver's seat before being shot in the head.
I would have never picked Andrew as a contract killer.
It's beyond belief that Victoria Police Force didn't know what he was doing.
Benji Vanyaman was viewed by everyone in the Melbourne underworld, including his friends, as a stick of dynamite with a lit fuse. He was now playing both sides of the war between Carl Williams and the Carlton crew. No one could be sure where his loyalties lay. A police phone intercept showed even his associates like Mick Gatto wanted to know where he stood.
Hello.
What's doing, buddy?
Hey, what's happened to you?
Oh, mate, just what?
You give me the ass.
Mate, don't even say that, mate. You'll offend.
I haven't heard you for a month.
We're meaning to drop in at that joint where you're there.
Mate, I'm there every day, buddy. Every day we're there.
I promise you, mate. I swear to you, I'm going to come. I want to come.
Mate, anytime you want it, buddy. You know where we are. You're welcome anytime, mate.
Benji would agree to meet Gatto a few days later, on March the 23rd. Benji arrived at La Porcella and, in his usual style, left his Mercedes double parked outside. He and Gatto began their conversation in the restaurant's main room. A few minutes later, they moved to a corridor at the rear of the building. There was an argument, a violent struggle, and then gunshots. Vanyaman was hit by 3 bullets. 2 in his neck and 1 in his head.
Melbourne gangland identity Mick Gatto was acquitted of Vanyaman's murder in the Supreme Court in 2005. Gatto admitted to shooting Vanyaman, but insisted he was acting in self-defence after Vanyaman pulled a gun on him.
We had him at his very first sentence. Quiet as a mouse, you wouldn't get a peep out of him.
Oh, really?
Spent about 3 or 6 months there. He wasn't a very big man. Most of the higher profile prisoners you see at some stage have been through the minimum security system, either at the end of long sentences or before they've become famous doing shorter sentences.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of them, as I said, a lot of the higher profile ones are very, very quiet when they're there because they've had all the publicity. They don't want any more.
But not all crims are afraid of publicity. Some absolutely caught it, becoming household names for all the wrong reasons. And on Steve's first day as a rookie prison officer, he got to meet Australia's most famous inmate. Then he got him naked.
That was actually my first day in the job.
Wow.
I was at the staff training college at Watsonia, and as part of our training, we had to do 2 weeks placement at Pentridge. And each day was spent in a different division. And the first day on there, it was pretty daunting walking in those walls. And feeling, if you felt claustrophobic, it wasn't the place for you. And my first day was in H Division, and of course, being only trainee officers, we had to shadow an existing officer and just follow him around and do what he tells us and so forth. And in H Division, the prisoners are allowed out their cells one at a time, and they have to be strip searched before they leave the cell, and they have to be searched before they get back in. And the officer I was with, who's sadly passed away now, but he said to me, right, have you done any strip searches? I said, no, it's my first day in the prison. He said, well, you can do the next one, and I'll stand there and make sure you do it right, because it has to be 2 officers to do every strip search anyway. In case anything's found, you've got to have a witness. Anyway, we went to the next prisoner. I opened up the cell, and he said, right, and the prisoner knew the routine. As soon as we got in, he started taking his clothes off. And anyway, finished the strip search, and I said to the officer, how did I go? Did I do it all right? He said, yeah, you did fine, no problems at all. He said, and one thing you'll be able to say to your grandkids or anybody else who asked it, your first day in the prison, your first strip search you did was chop a reed. So I thought to myself, I realised that moment that I've got myself into a job unlike any other job I've ever had.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure there are a few people who could say that they got chopper reed naked on their first day of a job. Now, time for the prison pop quiz. Each episode, I ask a corrections officer to decode the weird, the wacky and the wonderful of prison slang. They're the words and phrases you'd only know if you'd spent time behind bars. And trust me, some of them are truly disgusting. So what's the first word or phrase you have there?
A Forby.
Ah, good one. A Forby. 4x2? I don't know. What is it?
Okay. Well, prisoners refer to us as screws, as a lot of the public does.
Yeah.
So with rhyming slang for screw is 4b2.
Ah, good one.
And then 4b2 then gets abbreviated to just 4b.
I like it.
They leave out the 2, yeah.
So you're a 4b?
I'm a 4b, yeah. I'm a former 4b. I've been out that for 3 years now.
Yeah. All right, what's the next one?
Pay the thief.
Pay the thief. Dunno.
And it's basically anybody who's caught Peter thieving is only one step above the ladder as a pedophile. Then pedophiles, of course, at the bottom of the ladder, of the social ladder in prisons. But Peter thief, if you get caught by the other prisoners Peter thieving, you cop a fair old hide. And the Peter thief is somebody who steals from another prisoner in jail. And it came from the old English term of in England, prisons were called Peters.
Oh yeah.
So
right.
if you were a Peter thief, you were stealing it from inside a prison from other prisoners. A lot of our terminology came from England. And the same of our terminology in prisons came from what a lot of people aren't aware of came from the British Navy, because that's why we refer to each other as Mister, as people do in the Navy, and our shifts are called watches like they are in the Navy, because when the first prison officers in Australia were naval personnel, because the first prisons were ships, were hulks, when they used to keep the prisoners in, and they were guarded by Navy people, and that tradition sort of went on with this system. So it's very, very much based on the British Navy.
Okay, so look, we've got one more. What's your last one?
Well, something relevant to me where I work, and that's the boneyard.
That sounds terrifying. What is the boneyard?
Well, prisoners that are on protection are referred to by other prisoners as dogs. And so any place where dogs are kept, there must be bones. So if they're in the prison yard and they're in the protection prisoners are referred to as being in a boneyard, and each prison has a protection wing, and the protection wing is always referred to as a boneyard because that's where the dogs are. Where the bones are, the dogs are, so it's a boneyard.
I like it.
Yeah.
Geez, you've excelled at our pop quiz. We'll have to get you back for more testing.
Okay, no worries, anytime.
Hey, Steve, thank you so much for chatting to me. It's been great to hear all your stories and hope to talk again soon.
No worries at all. Anytime, Amelia.
That concludes our final episode of On Guard, the podcast that gets officers to spill their guts on what's really going on behind prison walls. Thanks for being a subscriber.